Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I do hope early September finds you well, because today we're going to be reviewing what is one of my guilty little pleasures, because I like isekai. I like those little Japanese novels that talk about going into other worlds. And today we have what I believe to be the Western equivalent. The Artificer by Raymond McNeil. Now, before we begin, I encourage everyone out there to get their own copy and review it for themselves. What I like, others might not like, and vice versa. This has been proven to me every time I go out to eat with someone, and I believe my taste in food is going to be like my taste in books. It's not always for everyone. There have been several attempts in the past to make some Western versions of the isekai genre. Some more successful with others, but most of what I've found so far has been disappointing. But let's get into the recap, and then we can cover that a bit more. So our book starts off with our main character playing a game, and then he dies. This is an average response to, gaming for too long. I'm sure all of us have read the newspaper articles about the gamers who just die after a few days of playing. But the death is not the end for our main character, who suddenly finds himself in the middle of the woods. Not dead. He is informed of his previous demise by a man who strodes out of the woods, though man's not entirely the right word. He has an ever-shifting face, and by that I mean he's continually growing and disappearing eyes, mouths, height. From what I can gather, he just simply can't hold an appearance. This being cordially greets our main character and offers him a cup of water, which the main character is hesitant at first, but given he is horribly thirsty and suffering the effects of what I can only deem to be post-death hangover, he reluctantly starts to drink the water, and immediately spills about half of it over his face. The being starts to inform the individual of not only his demise, but that he has now been transported to this new world. And in this new world, he's simply going to be turned loose for this being's amusement. But to help him out, this being gives the main character a strange tattoo, informing him the tattoo is magic. He doesn't bother to explain what it does because, as we all know, gods laugh at our pain, but the deity assures him it will be useful. He then promptly starts to disappear, leaving the main character with only a direction to travel in which he might gain shelter and the warning that there's lots of terrible things in the woods. Our main character, not wanting to be eaten or worse, decides to head in the general direction of east, as he was directed, and try to seek shelter. He does see several locals, but he can't decipher their language. He's hungry and he's tired, and he's not entirely sure what to do. He thinks if he had maybe a knife or a weapon, he might be able to mug someone, but really doesn't want to do such a thing. He decides instead to be sneaky, and decides to just simply sneak into a barn and try to figure things out from there. While sitting in the barn and sipping from this cup of water he was given by the deity, which appears to never empty, he starts thinking of all the things he could do with this little cup, and suddenly his tattoo starts to glow. Taking a moment to try to figure out what made this happen, he is suddenly interrupted by the sounds of people approaching the barn. He still can't understand them, and so decides to hide as best he can. He hides behind the doors, and when the farmer comes in, he does his best to sneak out, only to run into a second farmer on the other side. Being unable to communicate, he decides to simply book it. He takes off into the woods, being sent on his merry way by these jolly farmers with a hail of crossbow bolts, which is a customary greeting when you find somebody sleeping in your barn. Once he believes he is well enough away, he stops to catch his breath, thinking to himself that he wishes he had a weapon of any kind to defend himself, a spear or even a sharpened stick. And the moment he starts thinking of how to make one, the image of a perfectly sharpened wooden sphere appears in front of him. He quickly deduces that this is just an image, but after acquiring something of a sufficient size, he notices that if he holds it to this image, it changes color, And then with an immense thought, he simply wills the stick into being the sphere. It turns out that this magic allows him to turn things into whatever he wishes so long as he has the sufficient material. Deciding he would rather not sleep on the ground, he gathers up a bunch of materials and tries to make a cot. After sufficiently making the cot, he immediately passes out, missing the cot, and sleeps on the forest floor for the night. It's only when he wakes up that he realizes that this power is tied to his stamina, and I have to say, I do like power with a price. It really does make you feel that this isn't all going to be easy, and power should always have a price. Sitting on his cot that he regretfully didn't get to sleep on, he starts to think about what if he could make a book or some way to translate the native language so that he could learn it. It's then upon thinking about this that he's able to create a little pen that allows him to translate the local language, though he doesn't find this out till a little later. He decides his first priority should be to get food, and while he tries to use his spear to hunt, he is woefully ineffective at this task. He does find some berries, which he proceeds to try to use to make a sort of porridge using his newfound power. Unfortunately, the berries are poisonous to him, and it's while he's vomiting his guts out in the woods that he is discovered by one of the farmers he ran into last night. Fortunately, he now has this handy little translation pen that he has made and pinned onto his clothes. Being able to communicate with the farmer, he apologizes for breaking into their barn, and after being informed that he broke the lock on the doors, he said that if they will provide him with a place to sleep, he would be more than happy to not only fix the lock, but come do some work with them in order to pay off his debt. The farmer agrees, but he's going to have to talk to the other farmer first. This other farmer, it turns out, is a dwarf. And while making his copious apologies, the dwarf does agree, but has doubts about his ability to fix the lock. However, using his power, he is easily able to fix this rusted out, beaten up old lock that was really just waiting for sufficient force to break itself. The farmers, being noticeably impressed, decide he's not going to be a farmhand, he's going to be their handyman. They will actually use him to simply fix all the things around the farm that are broken. To which the main character agrees because, honestly, he just needs 2 hots and a cot at this point. It's during this time that he really starts to get a knack for the beginnings of what his power can do. He's slowly building some stamina, but he's also learning his limits, as in a time when he tried to repair an entire roof and simply passed out after successfully completing the job. But it's while he's talking with his newfound farmer friends that he starts to discover about the guilds and the taxes and all the other things that are simply nickel and diming the locals to death. With these conversations about always trying to make more money, our main character decides that he's going to start his own little business in order to make a little bit more money. With his ability to simply make things, it shouldn't be terribly difficult. His first break comes when a local bard brings him a broken lute that was apparently broken the night before when the bard was in a drunken stupor and got in a fight with a large wine cask, in which the large wine cask won and broke the aforementioned lute into about a dozen little pieces. Being provided a little bit of extra material and sufficient payment, our main character takes the lute home, repairs it, and brings it back to an overjoyed bard. This is a point where we're going to stop and talk about something important, because this is where our main character gets his name. You may have wondered why I have been calling him the main character the whole time, and it's because up until this point he has not had a name. And it is during this time, if I remember correctly, that he starts to think, well, people were often named after the professions they did. And eventually he decides to settle on craftsman, going by the name Craft. So from here on, I can finally use the character's name and simply call him Craft. And no, not like the macaroni and cheese. Word spreads quickly about Craft's ability to fix virtually anything they bring to him, and it's not long before he has enough work and enough money to buy his own little loft in town. The orders start stacking up and stacking up and stacking up, until eventually he gets a contract to start making safes for local banks. The orders are so high he actually has to go on a trip to acquire more specialized metals. And it's on a return from one of these trips that they run into a bunch of werven who have attacked a local caravan. Far too late to save the actual purveyors of the caravan, They're simply interested in saving themselves. And so Kraft creates a grenade from the materials he bought from the dwarves. And throwing it at the wyvern and running away, being the best option, simply mutilates the wyvern and laughs as they get away. This is a particularly interesting point in the book, as this is the first time he starts using items from our own world. They return, and shortly after, the town is celebrating a centennial of sorts. It's a large celebration, and in the main capital, they're actually intending to celebrate for a full year. However, in his town, they're only going to do so for about a week. It's during this celebration that a strange woman brings him a dagger, which she asks to be repaired. She states that it's a family heirloom, but it's fairly unremarkable. It's upon examining the heirloom in secret that he figures out that the dagger actually has a special enchantment on it to make it unrepairable to most conventional craftsmen. However, he's not a conventional craftsman, and his otherworldly gift easily allows him to simply fix the item. The woman returns the next day, surprised he was even able to do so, and starts acting shifty. Kraft, suspecting something was odd, uses some of his gadgets to lock the door and prevent her from doing a grab and dash. It's during their conversation that something interesting happens. All the mutilated wyverns he attacked a few months before show up in town and start attacking his shop and all the local residents. Apparently, wyverns are a lot like squids. They're one of the few creatures capable of plotting revenge. And this is where I'm going to stop the recap, because this will bring you to about the 30% mark of the story. Now let's talk about the things I liked, the things I didn't like, and my general thoughts on the book itself. Now, first of all, I'm going to state, yes, I liked this book. This book is right up my alley. I like isekai. I like isekai done well, and this is done fairly well. The story is reminiscent of other light novels I've read, such as those in the Overlord series. One of the things I particularly like is the deity. Now, it's revealed later that they call him the Beyonder, which is not a name I'm wild about because I think it's overused, but it does seem to fit. He seems to be some kind of chaos eldritch entity that simply wants to cause havoc. He is revealed a little later in the book, and he does really come across as a devil of sorts, just some kind of ultimate chaotic being that is hard to understand. I also really like the guns versus magic, which does come up later in the books. In fact, right about where we left off is where we get our first taste of firearms. And the main character is hesitant to bring this knowledge into this world, and I can understand why. He doesn't want to advance it too quickly. He doesn't want to give despots access to this kind of power too quickly. He's got good logic behind why he doesn't want to do it. And I believe that's played out pretty well. And one of the last things I'm going to mention here, because I'm also going to mention it in my dislikes, is the power. The power that the main character has. I like that it's a crafting power, that it's not some kind of overly destructive ability. It's only destructive if the main character chooses to make it destructive. And it does have rules, and it does have limits. It seems like a fairly well-balanced power. Now, moving into my dislikes, let's talk about the power, the things I don't like about the power. It's also a little bit broken. I'm also going to throw this within another thing that I didn't like, and that's the learning curve. Normally, with a power like this, it does take a little while, and I don't mean a while chronologically, I mean a while story-wise, for a character to learn the limits of his capabilities. And this power, it does feel like in some parts that he learns to utilize some of the crazier aspects of it a little bit too early. It borders a bit on feeling unearned, just with how ridiculous it gets later in the book, but it's not too far. It's just brushing right up against that border. There's also a part later where we deal with the love interest, and I'm just going to say this. romance in books can be hard if it's not your genre. And I'm sure it's hard even if it is your genre. It's really hard to do romance right. And while I can't complain too much about the romance, it's more about what his romance interest is. And I don't want to ruin anything here, so I'm going to leave it at that. There's some things that happen which seem a little bit unearned, I want to say. But again, it's something small. And here's my biggest gripe, and it's not book breaking. In fact, it's hardly even noticeable, and I think that's the problem. And that's the names of the people and the towns and everything that's not the main character. I have this thing with fantasy series where it can be really hard to make noticeable names. You want to make them fantastical, but oftentimes it just comes off as garble. And this is just common in all fantasy books that I read. When you try to make up names, it can be really, really difficult. And there are some that I caught. There are a few that I remember, but it got a little difficult to tell some of the characters apart because their names felt garbled. However, it was fairly easy after they acted or after something was revealed about them to figure out who it was. It was easy to keep track of the characters, just not by their names or the names of the towns. They just seem a bit more like just letters thrown together. And maybe that's just me, because when I see a word that I don't know in my head, my brain instantly just skips over it. That's more of a me thing than a this book thing, because I know a lot of people really like fantastical names. Now let's get into my thoughts. First of all, I do like this book. I want to see where this series is going. It looks like a fun series, and it looks like one that I could get into. The book isn't any longer than it needs to be. Also, the Beyonder himself, he feels a bit like being X from Tanya the Evil, but with an eldritch twist. He is certainly a chaotic entity, and once you know that, yeah, you can see it. He executes that really, really well. There's also, I'd say there's the makings for a really great series here, something I could really enjoy, but I'd like to see, and this is just what I would like to see, a bit more subtlety, a bit more power play between the different factions, and that could be difficult because everything is almost omnipotent first person. We don't really follow any other characters, and this feels like a series where we should follow some of the people who are under the main character or who are supportive to the main character, and even some of the bad guys, just to get more of a feel of their motives and who they are, to flesh them out, because I believe, and again, this is just me speaking, that this could really help flesh this series out a bit. It doesn't have to be much, just a little light touch. I would really like to see more intrigue and more power struggles. Something like that, I think, would really help build the tension and make the main character feel a little bit more threatened. But all that said, I would certainly recommend this book to anyone who's a fan of the isekai genre like myself. Again, this is one of my guilty little pleasures. I like isekai, especially when isekai is done well, and this has the makings to be isekai done well. And with all that, I will wish you all good luck. Thank you for listening to my review. If you have any books that you would like to hear my take on, please leave them in the description. I do tend to favor indie authors over conventionally published, but I will read whatever I find interesting or whatever captures my fancy. If you would like to read, review, or criticize my own works, I will include a link in the description. Also, please keep the comments civil in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy what I do, please consider giving this video a like, sharing my work, or subscribing to my channel. Thank you.